Don't let rampant politics and clusterfuckery ruin all your projects and your sanity. Smooth ugly penny lines and make it all make sense. Get experience by osmosis here on Corporate Underpants.
Hey everyone, it's Tamara. I'm just popping in for a quick intro. This is part 2 of my episode of my great conversation with Adam Staffa, who is an expert in doing web strategy for higher ed and other non-tech first organizations. In the first part of this episode, you heard all about how working on tech projects and digital projects in organizations like higher ed is different and yet just as messy and complicated, if not more so, than working in tech-first organizations on projects like websites or applications or products. In this episode, we're going to dive into what I love thinking of as the solution, which is early stage alignment of executives and stakeholders around what exactly are we trying to build, for who, and why should they care. Adam knew about me before I knew about Adam because my other friend, Andy, told him about the alignment work and the alignment process that I had started developing at that time. And he put it to work. So we're going to hear all about how everything changes if you get all of the stakeholders on the same page super duper early. And you'll hear how projects that Adam worked with in this one organization went from clusterfucked to under budget and under time, coming in early. So let's get started. Now we're going to get into some of the solution to corporate underpants. So corporate underpants is this was educational underpants. There is a solution to this, even though it seems insolvable. The solution is aligning people early, right? And in an organized way that also doesn't get you fired. Okay, so you got to the end of this project and everybody had shrapnel in their butts, especially you.
Yeah.
And were you still at the same organization at the time? Were you going into a
Yes.
new one?
Same
Oh,
organization. Yeah.
I think you had a really supportive boss.
Yes. My boss and I had worked together before. There was a good trust relationship with me and my boss. And then my boss had a good relationship with the president. This was great for going into the next project in terms of doing it a different way.
Let's skip back for 1 second. When you were hired, there was an outgoing web strategist who was leaving. I'm assuming that they put you through a gauntlet to hire you.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming they said to you, we're looking for somebody who can really come in and, I'm going to paraphrase, fix this.
Yeah.
Did they?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you weren't allowed to.
It's not that I wasn't allowed to. It's just, I think I didn't know. I thought I know how to do web strategy. I know how to do UX design. I know how to make the site great. So I know how to fix this project. At that point, I was still like relatively new to these large scale things and these complex organizations. And I did not realize how important that alignment work. I didn't know what alignment, I never even heard of alignment work. I always I thought this was standard. Like you have a document that says like your business goals, your outcomes. That was like in corporate, it's just a given. You didn't really, and the web strategist didn't even necessarily have to lead that work. It just was there.
Oh.
Demanded the work and said, here's what you got to accomplish. And it just came from top down and you did it.
And you did it because you assume that's their job. So throughout this project, it was hellacious for you, but you developed this amazing, or continue to develop this amazing relationship with your boss. And so having an ally, a strong ally, not just an ally, but a shit umbrella and a supporter, and that turned out to be really important for the next project in many ways. So you finally chug into the station and the little engine that could, with shrapnel and no gas left and exhausted and wheels falling off. And then there's the
Right.
next project. So tell us what happened there.
Yeah. So the next project I discussed with my boss and we went to the president and said, listen, if we want to avoid what happened in the last project, and by the way, this next project, we got a small grant to do and there was a limited time to deliver on the grant. It was the homepage and primary nav, like global nav and everyone cares about the homepage. Like even people who have no content on it, it's just the most visible thing. There's always controversy around that. And the navigation is critical. It's a gnarly navigation. It gets you to every portal and piece of content. So I said, in order to get this done in budget and in time, we really should get everyone aligned this time. And let's follow this process that I learned through Andy and Tamara indirectly, and let's do an alignment workshop.
You had, and they had money, they had a grant, they had limited time, and luckily they had been pre-disastered, right? So they had
Right,
just gone through a super painful experience that nobody liked.
right,
And this gave you some leverage, right? Because you could point to something and say, you don't want that to happen again, do you? And
right.
meanwhile, you had also talked to Andy Fitzgerald, who you knew for a long time professionally, who's genius about giant content projects. Andy was like, hey, you should probably think about doing some alignment. And you're like, yeah.
Yeah, he brought it up in the previous project, and so I said, this time I think we could and should do it, and so we did. And the thing was that what Andy had described was like, yeah, I could even help you. It'd be a 4-day thing, and here's how me and Tamara did it. And I was like, went to the boss, 4-day thing. Can we get No way. We are not getting stakeholders together for 4 days.
So
That was
Andy
like,
and I had worked on a project for
mhm.
Seattle Children's Hospital, and Andy's going to come on as a guest, and we're going to talk all about that, which was a giant organization that kind of is nonprofit, but also business. I don't even know the
Yeah,
official designation, but we had 15 freaking high level people to align first. And so Andy told you about that,
right.
and that it had some good effects. And you're like, oh,
Yeah,
great, we'll just do that. And they said, no way, you're going to
yeah,
get a
yeah,
bunch of people. And so what did you do instead? They said you could have
yeah.
4 hours.
Yeah, I got 4 hours at a meeting for basically a half day workshop was what I was given. And I said,
Okay, so
okay,
what'd you do?
we will consolidate this workshop to be effective in that time. We will pre-populate some things. We will bring some work already done, which is not ideal, but it gets you something. So rather than, I think in your structure, you have the stakeholders all work together to start from scratch, building the personas or the archetypes or the audience profiles, the alignment personas. And so rather than having everyone just build them from scratch and explain what they are, we created some generic, very rough generic ones and put some stickies on as some user needs and motivations and goals and information needs, and put them stickies on these archetypes, persona, and brought those in and said, where are we wrong? What are we missing? What do we need to add? What do we need to take away? And are we missing any other personas? And so that
Yeah.
saved a lot of time because it takes so much time to even get into that work and to start building a persona from.
This is the first time I'm getting to talk about the alignment persona process. What I've developed is this workshop that absolutely can be shortened. The first thing you have to do is define goals for the workshop itself. Like, why are you creating alignment? And I think you had very clear ideas of what you wanted to change. We do not want the pain that we had last time. We do not want this entire project to take as long as it did. We do not want it to come in over budget. We cannot wait. And so you had a before and after that you were picturing. Like, this time it's going to be
Yeah,
faster. This time it's going to be cheaper. This time it's going to be less shrapnel. And I always suggest that people do that before doing any kind of alignment work is they set goals for the alignment work itself, which is also good for your career because then you can say, this was the situation when I walked in. I recommended this potential solution and I said, these are the results I want. And look, we got them. Because when you fix a problem, nobody ever remembers what the problem was or how expensive or painful it was. It just looks like you came in and did the obvious. And in our careers in product, the better we are, the more obvious our work looks. So for your own
yeah,
career, setting the goals. And then you get the stakeholders together and identify
yeah,
business goals for the project, and then how they talk about users today, and then identifying wants and needs, and then creating alignment personas, and then prioritizing the alignment personas based on business goals. And I'm going to go a lot more into that. And that's the topic of the book, Align Before Design. And if you need coaching on that or whatever, you can come to me. But what you did was you knew the problems, you asked what you could get in terms of time. They said, you can have 4 hours with a bunch of stakeholders. And you're like, how can I get to a set of personas, which we're going to talk about using that word in 4 hours? And you said, what I'm going to do is instead of having them do all the work, I'm going to give them some things to push back on.
yeah,
You didn't say, here they are.
yeah,
So if you put up, let's say it was a returning student, and you put up
Yeah.
returning students and you put down what they wanted and needing. And then you also put up quick
Prospective students.
prospective students, right? And what they want and need. And you put them up. And then what did you say?
He said, what are their wants and needs? Who else do we need to address? Who else is missing? And somebody said, we have corporate partners. Okay, get that person up there. Let's quickly do a sticky for that person. You know what those people need. Put that down. Put sticky notes about what that person's wants and needs are. And
Zero resistance.
zero resistance. Yeah. Just whoever else, if these are the people that we have information on and data on that we've researched in depth, but we don't know everything. So you all are the experts. So you tell us what we're missing and who we're missing.
That's critical because one of the main ways to get alignment is getting all of the assumptions out of their brains and onto the table. It's not about the personas you end up with. It's about the fact that there's no one left in their brains that hasn't been discussed. So because you said that, it was genius. You said, tell me everything that we missed. And you do that. And I think the impressions of the workshop participants are, this is going to take forever. But then after, I always say, it feels like it takes exactly 20 minutes. And then they're like, they can't think of anyone else.
Yeah. They start to almost repeat themselves. They're like, do we have this? Oh, no, that person's right there. They're accounted for. Someone else already put them up. And because it was like about 10 people, you got enough people thinking of all the different angles, and they weren't all at the same level of management either. You had executive directors, you had managers, you had some people who were just like individual contributors on a team, but you just had every audience represented by somebody in the organization who people trust to represent that audience.
So
That was the
never
key.
later could anybody come up and say to any one of them, did you think about the guy with the parrot? They would all say, yeah, actually we
Yeah.
did. We talked about the guy with the parrot. And we
Yeah.
talked about how hard it would be to type while you have a parrot. You
Right.
know, but all of them become advocates because they're like, no, yes, we did. We got everybody out of our brains.
Yeah. We made sure to tell that web team that person needs to be considered. Don't worry. And again, ideally you publish afterwards, like all these personas and all these things that you came up with to
Of
the
course.
intranet or whatever, and you message it out. And then people are like, okay, they thought of all the people. They have all the goals listed that I would think of our goals, and they've talked to all the people that represent us.
Now, you said also that before this, everybody assumed that there were as many different goals as there were users they could think of.
Yeah, they thought there were a million goals and a million user needs, that there's no way we're going to get all these. But then you start to look at all the different users and their wants and needs, and you realize there's this Venn diagram, and many of the needs overlap, like 50%, maybe 75% of them almost overlap between all the users. For instance, prospective students and current students all need to know like the calendar information, the quarter start dates and payment due dates. They all need to know that. Your corporate partners, everyone needs to know what programs you offer. Doesn't matter who you're, like alumni want to know what programs are you offering now so I can decide if I want to donate to that program. So you start to look at the details, and you're like, there's not such a drastic difference in information needs between all of these audiences. Some of them have very unique needs or very unique ways that they're going to go look for that information, but generally the information that they need is not so drastically different that you can't accomplish addressing everyone's needs.
And what happens is if you have the person in charge of the donor program and the person in charge of the corporate partner program in the same room, they show each other that the needs are the same. It's not you, Adam, coming in as the know-it-all web strategist. It's
Yeah.
that they're like, oh, that's true. They both need to know how successful our programs are, and they both need to know where the money is going. So here Andy
Yeah.
is saying, identifying those overlapping needs is so crucial and such a powerful feature of this technique. It is. And also
Yeah.
all through this, remember, it's about them showing themselves. So it's
Mhm.
it's the process of getting them together. And that's why I love the genius thing that you did, which was put up examples, but then you absolutely required and invited, tell us everything we missed. Without that step, this would not have worked
Yeah.
because it's about them showing and telling each other where the similarities are.
And it's a good exercise. Even if you think all the stuff, and even if you got everyone, like some key stakeholders say, don't worry about it, but go for it. You don't even need us to do this. No, it's good to do it because you have blind spots. Everyone has blind spots. And so when you, again, like somebody brought up the accreditors as an audience. I was like, oh, yeah, that's an important, I never even thought about
Oh,
the accreditors as an audience.
accreditors.
Yeah. And they specifically need to be able to type in a certain keyword to find a certain set of information. And if they do not see that, you get a ding on your accreditation. So they pointed out this user needs this information, but they need it to be done in this way. They're going to look for it with this specific phrasing, and they need to see it that way in this spot. Good to
Yep.
know. Very important. That would have been a blind spot. Even if we look at the accreditation requirements, it's easy to miss them as a user and consider their experience.
These stakeholders, most of them are professional researchers and data
Yes.
junkies.
Yeah.
And you
Academics.
come in and you say, we're going to do personas.
Yeah. We're going to just start throwing on what we think these people want. And they're like, did you get data on this? How many users did you interview? What's your confidence interval for? I'd love to do that. That'll take 6 months, but we need to get this project done in 3 months. So what are our assumptions? And
You also asked them if they wanted to fund it. Which I
yeah,
love.
yes. Yeah. I was like, I'm happy to start doing that work and you guys have the budget. And then they realize we don't. So what are we doing and why are we doing it this way? And one way I got people on board with this idea of personas was I pointed out in some discussions that we had previously, I said, we'd be in a meeting and somebody would say, are we doing this? Or I had these 5 students come in the last 6 months and they've all asked about this issue, this need. They all wanted to know this and they were struggling with this issue. I said, okay, who's that student? Oh, it was my running start students. They always ask me this. Oh, okay. We'll just write that person down, running start student. What are they asking you? These 5 questions? Okay. Generally, they need that information. Yeah. Okay. I won't call it a persona, but that's what we just did.
The word
Yeah.
personas has such backlash, and I totally understand that. The idea of creating a person to design for is genius, was, and always will be. Cooper did something absolutely spectacular for our industry by naming this. What ended up, I think the reason why personas have such a bad name is because so many people approached with data first, created personas that were expensive and time consuming, showed them to people, and they should have worked, but they didn't. I think one of the main reasons that data first personas have had such a hard time is because people have underestimated the power of assumptions in the heads of powerful people. And here's a great, my silly example is, if data always changed people's minds, the world would be a very different place. I'm hearing myself say that and thinking of a particular political, we're not going to go there, but here's the tongue in cheek, but also true. If data worked, nobody would get married anymore.
Right.
Data suggests that it's not the greatest idea. People still do it. Why do they still do it? Because they feel they are different, because they are optimistic, because they want to do it for tax purposes, because nobody goes into a relationship like that thinking that it's going to end. It doesn't, if you have strong feelings about the rightness of what you're thinking, you're basically saying, okay, ignore the word personas. The word user isn't enough. The word student isn't enough. Who are you seeing? Oh, returning students. Okay, let's write that. And when my response was, can we call him Ricky?
Returning Ricky, whatever, right? And
Yeah.
the other thing is, it's not just assumptions from somebody who, these are people who have interacted with the users. And this is the other thing about higher ed or in a tech product, it's rare that all the internal people who are working have direct interactions on a regular basis with the users. So sometimes, right? In higher ed, the president, the head of student service, they talk to the students daily, all day, every day. They're fielding questions. They're directly interacting with them.
And how is that not data?
Yeah, exactly. It is amazing. It's rich as you can get,
Right.
other than talking to the students yourself. But you can go talk to 3 students, or you can talk to this one person who's talked to 1,000 students. The person who's giving tours to the students is talking to 1,000 students every day.
But the pushback would be, what about stereotypes? And what about the fact that they come in with their own lens and
The
you're not getting the full
biases.
stories and the biases? What I say to that is, okay, great. If you can look at your website and say, we're already nailing it for returning students, then yeah, you need to go get more data. But the wants and needs of returning students are not that mysterious. Speaking again about personas, didn't personas also become more problematic once folks developed proto-personas or presumptive personas? Cooper didn't consider these data-free artifacts personas at all. We should have a whole talk about the personas.
Yeah.
I wonder if I could get Cooper on the phone. I'm one of the people that Cooper isn't super happy with now, even though Cooper wrote a preface to our book. Issue with personas, one of them is that people kept renaming the process, including me. I originally called them ad hoc personas, and Don Norman wrote about ad hoc personas after we had a conversation in 2006. And then I renamed the process alignment personas because it's less about the fact that the personas are ad hoc than the fact that they align people. Cooper's issue is that everybody keeps reinventing, saying personas don't work. And then here's a new method that I invented, and it's called something else, but actually they're talking about personas. Proto personas, presumptive personas, alignment personas, similar artifacts. The difference with the alignment persona process is that they are the process is the point and not the artifact. The process of getting everybody aligned, the process of getting everybody's assumptions out on the table and them showing themselves that they're not aligned, and then creating this artifact together that is these people, these alignment personas, and they become a hypothesis for data collection. So, yes, the reason that proto personas, alignment personas, ad hoc personas started, and I was one of the first ones to do that work back in 2005, immediately after the book came out, was because data first personas weren't working, but the word user still sucked. So what do you do in that circumstance? You come up with returning students and you put the word Ricky in front of it, and you change the conversation to one around Ricky who has particular wants and needs, much less about demographics than wants and needs. Because whether Ricky is 15 years old and a prodigy or 87 years old, demographics different, wants and needs not so much. This is a much bigger topic.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's why I try to avoid, I think when you start to use the official industry lingo in these conversations, it can get a little hairy. And that's
Yep.
why just find a term that everyone agrees to is keep it generic, keep it user friendly. And that helps. And really, you're just talking about the people using the thing. What do they need to know? And how do they go about finding that information? And yeah, it's always great to do more research. But if you don't have time, you get what you can out of the stakeholders and the subject matter experts. And then you at least know what you're testing for afterwards.
Because in seventh grade, we learn that before we do research and gather data, what do?
Hypothesis.
Hypothesis. Somehow
Yeah.
we've managed to forget that in business, in web, in strategy, and everything. You're supposed to have a hypothesis first. If a hypothesis isn't based on assumptions, what the fuck is it? What we are doing is putting the hypothesis on the table. And sometimes the hypothesis doesn't need a lot of extra data because the hypothesis that we have returning students who want and need to know specific things is not the same as saying we want to send someone to the moon.
Right. Yeah.
And if you look at what they want and need, and then you go to the website you have and you try to find what they want and need, and you can't find it, you don't need data to know that there's some ways you can improve it.
I think if you're making a groundbreaking, new, technologically advanced tool or product, it's slightly different because you really have to narrow in on a target audience and a very specific, like, demographic, probably to make profit and ensure you're going to sell this. But when you're talking about like higher ed, you have to make it for everybody. If you're talking about government services, it has to work for everybody. And so you could be a little more broad and a little bit more generic.
Right. And a little bit more obvious. And the point is that often the requirement for data paralyzes organizations and keeps them from doing work.
Yeah.
Oh, we need
Like
more
nothing
data.
happens.
Nothing happens. So I did a big project. Again, another person I'm going to have on is somebody from the credit union, Washington State Employees Credit Union. And yes, you need data to figure out maybe who needs to open a bank account and who you want to have open a bank account. In their case, members versus customers, because that's the lingo of a credit union. and it's for everybody, right? But the fact that somebody comes to the website and wants to open an account for the first time, that's not a real scary hypothesis to make. And
Right.
what happened is when we looked at the website through the eyes of Nancy Newby, and I walked through it and create a little video showing that it's actually almost impossible to create a new account online by yourself for some
Yeah.
reasons that had nothing. They had a third party provider you had to create an account by putting it in a cart. They don't
Right.
anymore. And nobody looked at that because nobody wanted to question that contract they had with that third party provider. So it was off limits. We're just going to ignore it. Naming Nancy Newby as an important person, not rocket surgery. Walking through it as Nancy, I did that on video. And noticing that it was impossible to create an account didn't take a whole lot of data. And did it take a lot of data to know that was an important thing to fix?
No. And these days, with the amount of digital data that we have available to us, that's just naturally collected from the sites, and that you can like heat maps and all those things, you can validate a lot of these things. You could segment out audiences in Google Analytics and say, new users who visited these kind of pages, we're going to say that those are probably current students, and you can get demographic information from, so you can really validate a lot of this stuff. You can go through emails and do like great thing with AI now is like, you can do like quick analysis of like thousands and thousands of emails.
And in
And
your case, this is a stupid example, but maybe there aren't any returning students. Everybody thinks there are. Maybe
right,
you go out and do research and discover there aren't any. The only way that you can get rid of the returning student idea in their head is if they named it first. If they didn't name it first, you have nothing to push back on. They're
right.
still going to assume they're right. So if you get it out on the table, that actually gives your data a place to land and makes your data more powerful.
Yeah, you
More
heard from them. I think this person's important. Okay, let's make sure we account. We have to acknowledge that someone stated that person is there and has those needs. Let's take that so we can either validate it or invalidate. Like we can now look at that. Okay,
we can
that
now look.
and if there's not agreement that person exists, okay, that gives us a starting point for what we do have to research. You don't have to research everything, but except for where there's any conflict, really.
This
20
comes
people
in.
in the room all agree these things exist and some data validates most of it.
Right.
Fine. If you see like, all right, this is the one where there's some not much data to back it up and there's some disagreement. Should we go dig into that more? Yeah, go dig into that.
People are all worried about stereotypes with these educated guesses or whatever.
Yes.
But so often the problems are so glaring
Right.
that nobody's seeing them like a new account creator at a bank. Even if I stereotype a huge amount about that person, their age, their ethnicity, even their abilities, the fact that it's impossible to create a new account still stands.
Yeah.
And the fact that we could do better if we tried a little harder, because most of the time, the great people doing the UX have been ignored or pushed aside for political reasons. Suddenly you have that capital to do that, right?
Yeah.
And the political capital comes from being able to show them, dudes, adding an account to a card doesn't make any sense.
And then I think once you start to bring in the concept of business, like goals and everything, you can get people off of that a little bit. Like they don't get over, there's a way to pull them back off the ledge from freaking out over personas or whatever you call it. They start to see the value of it and they move forward. And then you start to say, okay, now which of these users helps us achieve this business goal that you said is a very important business goal? New applications. Okay, that's the prospective student aligns with that. What are their needs? Okay, we start connecting the dots and it just starts to move forward once everyone is in the room
Yep.
talking about it and identifying it and acknowledging like this is imperfect. There's no perfect process, but you're going to move forward. Like not doing it is extremely imperfect.
This is not, and this, I think it's David, Just who put this up, or unless it's another unknown user. Yes, there are academic arguments about, okay, hypothesis testing doesn't really exist. Whatever, right? I'm not
Right.
attacking you, David, but I'm just saying what we're saying here is that if you at least get this stuff out on the table and you align people around the fact that we do have a Richard returning student and we do have a poly potential donor, then it solves some of the giant mess that is a
Yeah.
human giant mess. not a data giant mess, not a quantitative or qualitative giant mess. It's a mess with the team trying to do the work together. The point is that people have a hard time working together, and this is a solution for that. It actually has very little to do with the validity or invalidity of
Right.
the alignment personas. It has to do with the alignment and the fact that if you change the conversation and say, we all agree that Richard exists, and everybody nods, then suddenly you can talk
Yeah.
about Richard. And it's
Yeah.
not whether one person is right or wrong. It's, yeah,
Yeah.
Richard comes to the site. The politics melt away because now you're talking about what Richard wants and needs, not whether geology and healthcare, one of them's going to win. So then what happened? So you came out of this alignment exercise, 4 hours, with what did you come out with? Did you have named goals for the project?
Yeah, we had clear goals for the project, and there was still some debate as to which of the top three priorities were very clear. Get new students, retain current students, and then you get into some of the other ones, get new staff and faculty to be excited about the organization. So there started to get some other goals
Yep.
that we couldn't get exactly prioritized, but we put them all at the same level and said, these four things, let's just equalize them. We're not going to say one is more important than the other, right? It was a little harder, but we at least had them stated. We knew by the end of
Hard.
the project that you had to achieve those goals. That had to be done. That had to be accounted for. And people were happy to know that, hey, you saw that's an important thing for my department. So thank you for acknowledging that. And when you show, hey, just so you know, we did make sure that someone can easily find this. It wasn't the big red button at the top, but you were in the same meeting where we all agreed that wasn't the most important goal of this section of the site. That is the most important goal of your section of the site, which we will redesign later.
Love
Right.
that. And so the big goals with the big broad personas end up being, if we don't satisfy Richard returning students, what the hell are we doing?
Yeah.
One of our main goals is to up our enrollment of community members. Most of them are returning students. Like, if we don't fix this and make it easier for them, what on earth are we doing?
Yeah, then you're not going to recruit faculty or anybody because you don't have an organization, right? And once they see that, they're like, okay, yeah, obviously we need to do that for us to even have this as a goal. Okay, great. And again, reminding them your goal and your audience overlap with this anyway.
Yeah.
So this is getting achieved indirectly in some ways as well. And so we had that clear list of goals. We had that clear list of users, their needs and wants outlined. We had some Venn diagrams to show the overlap. And so we had KPIs where we said, and just so we know, when we're going to be doing this work, the way we measure success here is more clicks here, more visits to this page, more. And we agreed to that. Yes, that's going to be a good thing. Okay. So now we can start moving forward, and the project got done in less time than we anticipated. It was 3 months, which I've never seen like in higher ed, any web project get done in like as broad scoped as that.
Early.
In 3 months. And it was during COVID. It was like when COVID first kicked in. So we got it done in 3 months during COVID, under budget. And at the end of it, rather than getting like angry emails about why'd you do this, people were actually sending nice emails like, oh, this is great. This turned out well. Like, and it wasn't like groundbreaking. I didn't think it was like the most impressive work output wise, like wasn't anything groundbreaking, but everybody felt heard. They felt like, oh, look, I could see that thing that my team had mentioned needed to be elevated or addressed, and my user is being represented here. I can find that. So thank you.
Nobody got me. Okay. I have to remind everybody
Yeah,
listening,
we got
this
really
is
nice
redesigning-
emails.
This is redesigning a homepage, which is
Yes.
possibly the worst project in the history of mankind.
Yeah.
Because nothing could be more contentious, right? And everybody
Yeah.
measures their own value by appearing on the homepage, which is, by the way, the best place to hide something. If you want to hide something, put it on a homepage. Another
Right.
topic for another day. And the global navigation.
Yeah.
And it came in under budget and ahead of time, and with thank you notes.
Yes.
And listen, getting alignment isn't super easy, and the conversations are hard, but either you have them early and you at least get somewhere, or
Right.
you ignore them and it wrecks, that causes tornadoes. Because if
Yep.
you had not had the alignment discussion and come up with your first design and your first proposal for the new navigation homepage and
Mhm.
presented that, oh my God, talk about a tornado.
Yeah. You might get halfway through the project and someone in the foundation might say, but there's not a huge donation button at the top. Like, why isn't that there? And if you did not have this alignment at the beginning that, yes, donations are important, but the homepage primary goal is apply. So we're going to elevate that more. Okay, we all agree to that and we understand it. Then halfway through the project, you're not having this discussion where even if you can get them off the ledge and say, okay, well, okay, fine, but it just derails you. Like every time someone jumps in with a new goal or a new audience in the middle or during the review process, you have to have this conversation and you can't move forward on the project till you come to an agreement.
I
Like,
particularly
why do you want
agree.
to have that discussion when you're at the review phase? That's
Right.
horrible.
That's horrible because then you have to start over. I love the idea that aligning personas and clarifying goals that very early and having this conversation early stop the conversation about the big red button,
Yeah.
which
Right.
otherwise people are going to try to reverse engineer their own importance into your
Right.
project. We need a tab for
Yeah.
that. We need a big red button for that.
Yeah.
Versus if the donors see, if like the donor team sees how attractive you have now become to returning students, it's going to make it easier for them to create a message for donors about why it's so great to support your organization because you're so welcoming to returning students.
Right.
Andy Fitzgerald, one of the things that he came up with in our Seattle Children's thing was it's not that one of the personas is necessarily more important than all the others. It's not more important to the organization. It's just the question of we have a lifeboat, everybody's gonna who do we get in first? Like what's the biggest problem we have to solve first before we take up room with everything else?
Right. This isn't the only place that a thing can happen, an activity can happen, or interaction can happen, or a transaction can happen. For the homepage we're talking about, or the navigation, the primary goal is an audience assist. When we get into these subsites, we can say the primary audience is this. And this is the thing about these expansive ecosystems in higher ed and government. The site is broken down to many subsites and microsites, and people don't realize that. It's okay, well, for this part of it, the main goal. And so you have to start to look at it that way. Is each section might have different persona priorities and things like that.
One of the reasons that this worked was because you had some air cover.
Right.
Because even getting those 4 hours, somebody had to spend some political capital to get those early 4 hours because that was a leap of faith by the rest of the executive team even to give you that.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that and your advice to people based on that?
Yeah. I think definitely don't try to do this when you first get into an organization unless you've already built up some political capital with stakeholders or people. But if you're new to an organization, if you're in a position where you're leading big projects, you want to try to find a way to build good relationships with leadership, the decision makers, however you can, and then prove to them that you can do projects effectively, prove to them the value of alignment. And one way to do that is do a small project where you just do alignment with just your 3 team members, or maybe you're just doing one page or one small change on the site or product.
You've even
And
developed
alignment canvas.
a
Yeah.
canvas, yeah, that
Yeah.
we're gonna put together a link to, but go on.
Yeah. But so do it at small scale and show that it can work. And then start to build that relationship. Like and you want to start working your way up through your org and then have your org then advocate for you to greater leadership, try to get yourself seen on projects and meetings and just build trust. I think that's important.
And if any of you are looking for some help or some coaching through that, I can help you with that. If you're in higher ed, Adam can help you with that. In fact, Adam doesn't have a ton of time, but because Adam is on the Corporate Underpants podcast, we have a special, all of you should connect with Adam, even if you're listening to this recording after, and mention Corporate Underpants. And Adam has generously offered to certainly answer your questions in detail on LinkedIn. And also, if you take some calls with a few of you who are looking at your own projects, which is one of the ways that Adam can work with firms needing his expertise is you get to talk to him a little bit more because he's so talented, I agree, and able to make these ideas result in achieving real change. And the other thing is, if you work in an organization where you've got a big problem and you do need somebody to wrangle executives, then not for nothing, but you need someone like me who can come in and throw a book down on the table and boss them around. Doing that from inside and under,
Yep.
you have to be very careful and not put yourself in danger So
Yes.
start small.
Yeah.
Start small, and there's lots of ways to start small. You can just send your boss a note saying, I think this is what I'm hearing our goals are. Is this true?
Yeah. Just get it on paper in an email. I agree. Like bringing in outside consultants for big projects, if you're not at that level, you did not build that trust, it helps tremendously. I brought Andy in on a big project where I really need someone to back me up and explain things from an outsider objective perspective. And that bought a lot of trust and kept
And that was
everything.
on the idea of taxonomy, right?
Right. Yeah. Because I stated for one project, we have to redo the taxonomy, and people are like, why do we have to redo that? And what does that even mean? Are you sure we have to redo that? That seems like overly complicated. And then I brought in a taxonomy expert who's worked on many projects and said, this person can explain why we need to do this. There's something about having an outsider explain it. There are many years of experience. For some reason it works.
Yeah.
And it takes the load off of you to be the person who's creating that, like,
Well, and it
we-
gives them a reason to say yes to it because the expert said it. It changes the political dynamics because it also gives whoever's saying yes to it cover. Well, I
Yeah.
was agreeing with this world-renowned expert on taxonomies, right?
Right.
Or we
Yeah.
brought in the person who wrote the book on personas, even
Yeah.
though the book I wrote has not a ton to do with how I do the work today. That's what this is all about. It's still about politics.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. The politics gets in the way of most of these projects. It's not the technology. Technology is there. It's pretty straightforward. Like building a CMS is not rocket science, developing a construct. It's hard. I'm not diminishing that work, but I'm saying people know how to do that. A lot of this work has been done and proven to work, and templates exist. All these things exist. All the work is out there.
and I'm
It's
working on a
there.
little self-assessment quiz you can do in your own organization and show the results to your leadership about like
Yeah.
one of our main goals is to up our enrollment of community members. Most of them are returning students. If we don't fix this and make it easier for them, what on earth are we doing?
Yeah, then you're not going to recruit faculty or anybody because you don't have an organization. And once they see that, they're like, okay, yeah, obviously we need to do that for us to even have this as a goal. Okay, great. And again, reminding them your goal and your audience overlap with this anyway.
Yeah.
So this is getting achieved indirectly in some ways as well. And so we had that clear list of goals. We had that clear list of users, their needs and wants outlined. We had some Venn diagrams to show the overlap. We had KPIs where we said, and just so we know, when we're going to be doing this work, the way we measure success here is more clicks here, more visits to this page, more. And we agreed to that. Yes, that's going to be a good thing. Okay. So now we can start moving forward, and the project got done in less time than we anticipated. It was 3 months, which I've never seen like in higher ed, any web project get done in like as broad scoped as that.
Early.
In 3 months. And it was during COVID. It was like when COVID first kicked in. So we got it done in 3 months during COVID, under budget. And at the end of it, rather than getting like angry emails about why'd you do this, people were actually sending nice emails like, oh, this is great. This turned out well. And it wasn't like groundbreaking. I didn't think it was like the most impressive work output wise, like wasn't anything groundbreaking, but everybody felt heard. They felt like, oh, look, I could see that thing that my team had mentioned needed to be elevated or addressed, and my user is being represented here. I can find that. Thank you.
Nobody got me. Okay. I have to remind everybody
Yeah,
this.
we got
This
really
is
nice
redesigning-
emails.
This is redesigning a Hulk, which is
Yes.
possibly the worst project in the history of mankind.
Yeah.
Because nothing could be more contentious, right? And everybody
Yeah.
measures their own value by appearing on the homepage, which is, by the way, the best place to hide something. If you want to hide something, put it on a homepage, another
Right.
topic for another day. And the global navigation. And it came in under budget and ahead of time and with thank you notes.
Yes.
And listen, getting alignment isn't super easy and the conversations are hard, but either you have them early and you at least get somewhere, or
Right.
you ignore them and it wrecks, that causes tornadoes. Because if you had not had the alignment discussion and come up with your first design and your first proposal for the new navigation homepage and
Mhm.
presented that, oh my God, talk about a tornado.
Yeah. I could give an example of the foundation might say, you might get halfway through the project and someone in the foundation might say, but there's not a huge donation button at the top. Like, why isn't that there? And if you did not have this alignment at the beginning that, yes, donations are important, but the homepage primary goal is apply. So we're going to elevate that more. Okay, we all agree to that and we understand it. Then halfway through the project, you're not having this discussion where even if you can get them off the ledge and say, okay, okay, fine, but it just derails you. Like every time someone jumps in with a new goal or a new audience in the middle or during the review process, you have to have this conversation and you can't move forward on the project till you come to an agreement. Why do you want to have that discussion when you're at the review phase? That's
Right.
horrible.
That's horrible because then you have to start over. I love the idea that aligning personas and clarifying goals that are very early and having this conversation early stop the conversation about the big red button,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
otherwise people are going to try to reverse engineer their own importance into your
Right.
project. We need a tab for
Yeah.
that. We need a big red button for that.
Yeah.
Versus if the the donor team sees how attractive you have now become to returning students, it's going to make it easier for them to create a message for donors about why it's so great to support your organization because you're so welcoming to returning students. All right. Lifeboat. Andy says lifeboat. When we talked to Andy Fitzgerald, like one of the things that he came up with in our Seattle Children's thing was it's not that one of the personas is necessarily more important than all the others. It's not more important to the organization. It's just the question of we have a lifeboat, everybody's gonna who do we get in first? Like what's the biggest problem we have to solve first before we take up room with everything else?
And this isn't the only place that a thing can happen, an activity can happen, or interaction can happen, or a transaction can happen. For the homepage we're talking about, or the navigation, the primary goal is an audience is this. When we get into these subsites, we can say the primary audience is this. And this is the thing about these wild, expansive ecosystems in higher ed and government is like the site is broken down to like mini subsites and microsites, and people don't realize that. It's okay for this part of it, the main goal. And so you have to start to look at it that way. It's like each section might have different persona priorities and things of that
Yeah.
nature.
So lifeboat, if you get in the person first who knows how to drive all the mini boats, right?
Mhm.
And then you bring in it. So if that's once you get to each individual department, at least there's somebody there who can take that boat to shore, right? The analogy is
Mhm.
getting a little stretched. Okay. So Adam, this worked. One of the reasons that this worked was because you had some air cover.
Right.
Because even getting those 4 hours.
Mhm. If you're in a position where you're leading big projects, you want to try to find a way to build good relationships with leadership, the decision makers, however you can, and then prove to them that you can do projects effectively or prove to them the value of alignment. And the one way to do that is do a small project where you just do alignment with just like your 3 team members, or maybe you're just doing one page or one small change on the site or product.
You've even
And
developed a little
an
dashboard
alignment.
or canvas. Yeah. That we're
Yeah.
going to put together a link to, but go on.
Yeah. But so do it at small scale and show that it can work. Then start to build that relationship. Like and you want to start working your way up through your org and then have your org then advocate for you to greater leadership, try to get yourself seen on projects and meetings and just build trust. I think that's important.
And if any of you are looking for some help or some coaching through that, I can help you with that. If you're in higher ed, Adam can help you with that. In fact, Adam doesn't have a ton of time, but because Adam is on the Corporate Underpants podcast, we have a special, all of you should connect with Adam, even if you're listening to this recording after, and mention Corporate Underpants. And Adam has generously offered to certainly answer your questions in detail on LinkedIn. And also if you take some calls with a few of you who are looking at your own projects as well, which is one of the ways that Adam can work with firms needing his expertise is you get to talk to him a little bit more because he's so talented, I agree, and able to make these ideas result in achieving real change. And the other thing is, if you work in an organization where you've got a big problem and you do need somebody to wrangle executives, then not for nothing, but you need someone like me who can come in and throw a book down on the table and boss them around. Doing that from inside and under, you have to be very careful and not put yourself in danger. So start small.
Yeah.
Start small. And there's lots of ways to start small. You can just send your boss a note saying, I think this is what I'm hearing our goals are. Is this true?
Yep. Yeah. Just get it on paper in an email. Like you said, and this is, I agree, like bringing in outside consultants for big projects, if you're not at that level, you did not build that trust. It helps tremendously. I brought Andy in on a big project where I really need someone to back me up and explain things from an outsider objective perspective. And that bought a lot of trust and kept
And
it
that was
there.
on the idea of taxonomy, right?
Yeah, because I stated for one project, we have to redo the taxonomy, and people are like, why do we have to redo that? And what does that even mean? Are you sure we have to redo that? That seems like overly complicated. And then I brought in a taxonomy expert who's worked on many projects and said, this person can explain why we need to do this. And that there's something about having an outsider explain it. Their many years of experience. For some reason, it works.
Yeah.
And it takes the load off of you to be the person who's creating that.
And it
need.
gives them a reason to say yes to it because the expert said it. It changes the political dynamics because it also gives whoever's saying yes to it cover. I
Yeah.
was agreeing with this world-renowned expert on taxonomies, right?
Right.
Or we
Yeah.
brought in the person who wrote the book on personas, even
Yeah.
though the book I wrote has not a ton to do with how I do the work today. That's what this is all about. It's still about politics.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. The politics gets in the way of most of these projects. It's not the technology. Technology is there. It's pretty straightforward. Like building a CMS is not rocket science. Developing a construct. It's hard. I'm not diminishing that work, but I'm saying like people know how to do that. They've done it. It's been done. A lot of this work has been done and proven to work, and templates exist. All these things exist. Like all the work is out there.
and I'm
For
working on a
the
little self-assessment quiz you can do in your own organization and show the results to your leadership about are we aligned or not. It's not going to blow your socks off if you're listening to this podcast, but it's like some obvious questions. Do we revisit
Yeah.
decisions after we've made them? How
Yeah.
many times have we had design reviews and majorly changed goals for the project, whatever that
Yeah.
is?
I've done some consulting for some agencies at times as well. And I noticed that even agencies, they don't have this built into their work. And one of the things I recommended was building that into the beginning of the process. Make it part of you don't even have to call it alignment work. You can call it part of the discovery process. One of the things we're going to do in the discovery process is an alignment workshop.
That's one of the things I do in my proposals. Is the first step is identifying, I call them business goals. And I call them business goals for a reason we talked about. They always say you can take that part out because we already have them. And I
Yeah.
always say, that's great, send them over. And I never get them. So
Mhm.
just call it something that you know they can't say no to. In the world of corporate and tech, if I say I need the business goals for this project first, who the hell can say to me, no, you don't?
Right.
That's not true in nonprofit, but
Yeah.
Adam has come up with some different words that we can't start without.
And you want to say, hey, are all the decision makers in agreement that these are the goals? Did you make sure you vetted this? And are you sure this isn't a business goal? You start throwing out some other business goals to validate. Did you think through all of these? Because you get halfway through and someone says, you know what, actually our goal isn't new applications. We realize we're doing great with applications, but we want more research funding, and people need to know that we are a research institution right off the bat from, oh, okay, that's a different goal now. So you want to get them all on the table right at the start, like every possible goal that could exist for that type of organization. And it's always a good idea to have a bunch of pre-listed goals. Like, hey, so just to be clear, this is your goal, but here's some other ones. Are these goals as well? I just want to clarify. And then once they start to go through and say, actually, that is a goal. And okay, so can we make sure we're on the same page? None of these are the important goal, right?
A
Just want to
huge
make
sign of
sure.
seniority in any element of our industry and anything related to product or tech is the moment that you realize the goals don't exist. And secondarily, the moment you realize that complaining about that is dumb, that our job is to help them come up with them. Companies and organizations set global business goals at the beginning of the year. They have often, even if there's KPIs and OKRs, they often have very little to do with individual projects, which change throughout the year. Everybody who starts an individual project assumes it rolls up to a business goal that's clear. Meanwhile, after the first time they meet, anytime two or more executives are together in a room and have a conversation, something changes. No one writes it down. And it is, remember this, it is political suicide for a senior person above you to say to another senior person, I don't remember what our business goals are. And therefore, by modus ponens, we can deduce logically that business goals are not written down. They're not solid. The way to do this without getting murdered as a professional is to say just one level up. I think this is what I'm hearing. It sounds like we really need to increase the number of returning students who are enrolled, which probably means we need to increase the number of enrollment applications online. Is that true? And if so, are you guys thinking 10%, 50%? You say it in a way where that person can forward it above them and say, please correct Adam. Poor Adam is so confused.
Right. And the other benefit of kind of doing it collaboratively is, again, in these type of organizations, there's a lot of shared governance or perceived shared governance, and politics plays a big role. And so even if the executive team says, nope, we've decided this, that's great. Like, you're going to go to the faculty senate a year later and they're going to be screaming and hollering at like a meeting. Like, we didn't know that these were the goals. We think these are the goals. Okay. If you can at least get everyone on the same page that like, these are the goals, you will have less of that conflict later, and you'll be able to move projects. You build trust in the organization. And that is important in nonprofit in these organizations.
Dr. Cheryl Roberts, who seems to know you, said that you did
She was the president. Yeah. At Shoreline Community College. So she was the one who we had advocating with us to do this workshop.
Okay, so Dr. Roberts was the one who had some of the political capital and could see the value of this, and says you did a small focus group with the executive team, not the alignment workshop, but a small focus group that helped us understand the process.
It was essentially the workshop. Yeah.
Oh, so calling it a focus group can also help,
That can help. Yeah.
right?
Again, using different terminology in these spaces is very helpful. When you start using a lot of business jargon, it throws people off. It's very humbling. You start to realize how humbling it is. But if you can show that you're doing work in an equitable way, it helps build better culture in the organization. In organizations that are rife with politics and stress due to limited resources, I'll say like nonprofits, healthcare, government, they'll often have like big tech leaders come in and do some work. And my advice to them is you can't use that like top-down model and approach. It just doesn't work in these organizations. Things will break, even if you are right, even if you know exactly how it should go.
Yep.
And the audience, it just works differently in these organizations, as it should. It's better. You get better results as an organization when you come at it with this shared.
Well, yeah, I mean, like you could write a web strategy for Harvard University right now. It's not that different than anything you've done before. You don't come in and say, here it is. It's never going to work. It's the ability to wrangle the process. It's the ability to do the rodeo.
It's thousands of people doing all these pieces of the work on a day-to-day basis. You want them to feel like they were part of that work and process. They understand why they're doing it. They need to know, why did I change my workflow? Or why isn't this content here? Or they're not going to care. And they're going to start to feel like this job doesn't make sense. So they have to understand why they're doing
Their
this.
egos.
Yeah.
Too.
And their morale.
Any final thoughts for our listeners today, Adam?
I would just say, again, start small, always try to get buy-in, be flexible on how you do your project. There's no magic formula. You don't have to follow a rigid process. Know what the end goal is of the workshop or the process. Just as long as at the end of it, you feel like you've achieved that. It's going to be messy sometimes.
Yeah.
I think that's something a lot of practitioners look for. They look for this exact process and and then they try to, and this is what's gotten a lot of pushback from UX and why people have shoved it aside at times, because some of us get so mired in like this, like following the process to a T, as some people have learned it in school or through a workshop. And then they get rigid on it. And then no one wants to do it because they don't have time, or you're missing this one component. So don't get stuck on like any one process or terminology, like whatever works in the organization.
And rigidity, it makes you particularly susceptible to tornadoes, like rigid structures, and sharing those is so valuable. And I just thank you so much, Adam, for being willing to be vulnerable about that, for telling us these great, horrifying stories, and for sharing those experiences.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I like talking about this stuff, so I appreciate it.
Okay, everybody. Thank you, Adam, so much. And bye-bye, everybody. See you next time.
Great.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Corporate Underpants, and there's lots more to come. If you have any projects that you need my help on, if you're interested in coaching to become a senior product leader through understanding alignment and politics,
Or if you're interested in any of the classes or books that I'm developing, please visit my website, adlininc.com, and get in touch.